episode 38 of Strange Brow Radio. It's me, I'm your host, Tobe Johnson. Thanks for joining us. We are back. It seems like it's been a while, but a lot has happened since we've last spoken. And we're going to get into some of that. We're going to get into quite a bit. In fact, it's Patreon time, so if you haven't heard, well, now you're going to hear about Patreon and Strange Brow Radio. It is going live tonight. I believe it is going to be on the 7th of October. I want to thank our sponsor, Feral by Aaron, Etsy.com. Get your butt to Etsy. Look out for the little heart button. Click the heart button or make a purchase. It's holiday time. And it's your time to get on Etsy. Shaman-inspired drums, rattles, and smudge fans. And as I said, gallery pieces. Legit. In Stanwood, Washington, with artwork by artist and contributor from Ancient Aliens, Marcia K. Moore. Check her out. Alright, it's a mashup time. Strange Familiars meets a la Strange Brow with Timothy Renner. I'll tell you more in a second. We'll be right back. Alright, in this episode, this is what they call a mashup, I guess. I don't know if I love that term, mashing together podcast. Alright, we mashed it together. Timothy Renner and I from Strange Familiars did a mutual podcast together. We shared an episode. So if you hop on over to Strange Familiars, you can hear the entire talk. I believe he probably has it listed under something that has to do with the Al Moon Lab Extra or something to that effect. This is going to be a two-part podcast with Timothy Renner and I. We got back together and did a mutual podcast regarding some objects that we shared that he mentioned in an area that he experienced some stuff called Pandamonium. And if you haven't heard those two episodes, go back and listen to Strange Familiars' last 3 or 4 podcasts, and he gets into what this Pandamonium business is and these objects that we shared. We've had some stuff happen over the last month, and so we just basically got together to share this stuff. However, since this is a 2-part series on mine, this is one for members and non-members. The first part is, of course, going to be a non-member episode. If you want to hear the second episode, you're welcome to go find that over at Strange Familiars. I'm breaking this down into 2 parts, though, because I had a chance to go down to Cottage Grove, Oregon, and stay at the Al Moon Lab, and walked away with some pretty amazing stuff. Mainly, after I left, things started to occur as soon as I pretty much put the gas pedal down and started headed north again to Washington State. You get these text messages or pictures about things kind of occurring that way from the property owner that no longer lives there, Daryl Adams, or things going on up at this property in Washington that may or may not be connected. Regardless, I got together with them and did a kind of a deep dive on Daryl Adams. I wanted you to meet him one-on-one. He's been out there before. You know, you can find us on YouTube talking about the lab and his wife. But I'd never sat down with him and done a podcast. So we sat down, and we got his perspective on what exactly has occurred with him, you know, before, during, and after the Al Moon Lab. Then we spoke to Ren Varney, who's also done an episode with us here. He's the neighbor to the Al Moon Lab and still lives there and has had some very interesting stuff. So that's the extra. It goes on for quite a bit, and we do some field audio towards a place where they had a sighting of these lights, some strange smells, and we're getting surrounded by heavy footsteps. So that's what's in the Patreon episode, and you can only get it if you go to Patreon. And the best way to do that is type in Patreon, Patreon, become a member, type in Strange Brow Radio, it'll pop right up, it'll have our logo up there, and you can decide which membership level you'd like. Just type in Strange Brow Radio, BRAU Radio. There's a 2 package. There's a package 1 membership which is extra podcast a month, at least one extra podcast. And then the second level, which is only slightly more expensive, you'll get extra podcast, extra audio, and also extra video, including the Secrets of the Sasquatch from 2019 that recorded in Oregon with Joe Hauser of the Montana Vortex, Ron Moorhead of Sierra Sounds, Ira Wolfnosen, healer and future author and experiencer, and Carrie Campbell, Ron Moorhead's wife, who also saw a cloaking Sasquatch. And of course, if I didn't say that, Ron Moorhead of the Sierra Sounds, and Tom Powell, The Edges of Science, and Christopher O'Brien from Stalking the Herd, also contributor of Ancient Aliens, and myself. So it's a pretty long one. It's like 3 hours long. Check it out and let me know if you have any questions along the way. There's another video up there as well for the second level membership on Patreon regarding the mysterious lights in the sky, and all the links should be ready to click through. So we're still trying to get stuff up on YouTube as well for people that just want to watch things on YouTube. But today, part one of Strange Familiars regarding Pandamonium and the Al Moon Lab. So let's listen to part one. Here on the phone with Timothy Renner, and he's the host of Strange Familiars podcast. How's that for an opening?
There you go. We got Strange Brow and Strange Familiars, the double strange
Right.
podcast, shared podcast here.
Oh yeah, we're keeping it strange, all right. And your last episode really proves how strange your world is, and I just put out an episode that kind of proves how strange my world is, and that's why we wanted to talk.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. I wanted to mention to my listeners, if you haven't listened to Strange Brow episode 37, it's called the Al Moon Lab Recordings. Now, Tobe has been on before. He was on way back in episode 42. I think I called it Paranormal Bigfoot with Strange Brow. But we've stayed in contact over that time. And he's just released an episode that shares a whole bunch of audio that he recorded at the Al Moon Lab site. It's essential listening as far as I'm concerned. You should definitely go listen to it. And we're going to be sharing a couple clips here tonight, but you should definitely listen to that. That's Strange Brow, episode 37. Thank you for doing that. That was, I absolutely love those episodes.
No, and what my audience doesn't know, we'll tell them now, is that, we absolutely have been working behind the scenes on some, not really projects, they're more like experiments. These are, at-home citizen scientists, in my case has a day job, but is incredibly curious. That's, the one thing I have going for me is my curiosity, really. So that curiosity led us to do these experiments where we did these mutual gift exchanges of what in our case was objects that were gifted to us from the others. I think that's the agreed upon name that we're both using.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I love. I think Nicole Kidman would be proud of us. But yeah, in my case, I sent you some items in the mail, and you sent me some items in the mail. You sent me actually way cooler items, a ton of your books and swag. And I appreciate all that. And if, as I mentioned before to the listeners, Timothy, can I call you Tim, or do you go by strictly Timothy?
Tim is fine. I use Timothy on the books just so I don't get called Timmy,
Okay. All right. And my name's actually Toby, but everyone calls me Tobe. So Tim sent me a ton of his books, and he's an incredible artist. So if you go to Dark Holler Arts, is that how I say it?
Yeah, that's the old record label website. Still going, and strangefamiliars.com has stuff.
He does all his own music. He's amazing. I mean, so you paint a lot from the perspective of someone who's interested in folk art and the mysticism behind folk tales, and man, every inch of it just reaches out in your show. It has that, just that really cool enigma that's Strange Familiars. And that's important to have when you have a podcast, is to have your own little signature tied to it. And you and I talk about similar things, but we kind of have our own different signature that we try to put on our shows, which I guess is our personality. But Yeah, so that's how we met. We started exchanging these objects as of like, I think it was July, the middle of July that we did this. And I don't know, do you want to start with that experiment, or what are you feeling like?
Um, well, we could get into that first, or I'd really like to update my listeners kind of on what you've been doing since. So I know you moved from the one site, from the old Al Moon Lab site, the first one, I guess. You call it Al Moon Lab 1, right?
Right. So now we have two names because it's a series of events. So the Owl Moon Lab is in Cottage Grove, Oregon, and those were the years, for the most part, is 2012 to 2019. And now we have the Owl Moon Altar, and that's in Washington, where I live now in the Olympic Peninsula. And the reason one has the name lab is because we would do these citizen scientist experiments. And this place here, the altar, is because we have these little tiny wooden altars set up all over the forest. We have a nice little parcel of woods behind the house where we have activity. So that's where they got the names.
Now, the activity, it seems to have followed you, or was the new site already active before you moved there?
It was, yeah. So my girlfriend, Erin Jackson, who's also my sponsor on the radio show, if people haven't picked that up by now, Erin Jackson is also the sponsor of Feral by Erin at Etsy.com. Get your shaman inspired drums, rattles, and smudge sticks. But she, not only a talented artist, that I moved up here with, she also grew up as a long term witness. And so she had a place next door to where we live, and she boarded horses. That's where activity really peaked up. But even before that, she was a witness, and a witness after that with her son. So she grew up with the phenomena, and that's how we met. We actually met at a conference regarding Sasquatch, and that's how we actually started meeting one another more regularly. Let's put it that way. And
Mhm.
and so we started this friendship, and I lived down in Oregon at the time, and I knew that stuff was going on in Washington because she reminded me of the activity that was happening up here. It didn't seem exactly the same as the type of activity that was happening in Oregon. It was way more aggressive. In fact, we have this debate whether or not Oregon had more male energy going on, and Washington, the altar site, had more of female energy going on. And I know that may sound a little bit weird, but as far as like what was being gifted, it was very in your face down in Oregon. Constant daily episodes of the unbelievable. And it didn't matter really who was around, what was going on, it was just going to happen. Up here, it just kind of, I don't know, it's like going to like a really quiet little gift store, and you find little trinkets, and they just kind of, appear like little pretties, is what she calls them, appear on, you know, all over, inside the house and outside the house. And there's also some gamesmanship that goes on here. But yeah, there seems to be a communication between what was going on in Cottage Grove and what is happening here. For example, I make these wooden sculptures. I sent you one. They're chainsaw carvings of faces. And I carve off bits of, in this case, of the beard of a wood watcher. That's what they're called. And so when I carve these, there's tons of little burnt edges because I use map gas to basically, bring down the sanding effect of it to a level I like. And it also works for colorizing it and shading the cedar wood. And so these little bits of cedar are falling down over my little work area. Well, one of these cedar bits appeared in Cottage Grove. Now, do I know, for example, that it matched exactly off of a wood sculpture I did? No, but it was a burnt piece of cedar sanded with a point that matched several sitting up here in Washington. Now, why is that important? Why do I think that that's even possible? Well, it was laying in the middle of a glyph. Okay. It was set in the middle of a glyph. And we get all these stick structures set up against this possessed or haunted metal shop. And we maybe get into that later. But the idea of something appearing across space and time, hundreds of miles away, is something that we had to grow kind of used to being possible.
Right.
if you listen to my previous episodes, episode 1 of Strange Brow Radio, you'll hear the story about a rock traveling across space and time 35 miles, going from the top of a stump to the threshold of a bathroom. And we caught this all on video in real time. Well, we were a couple of minutes behind the curve because I think this stuff doesn't really go by time. It has its own schedule. So yeah, that's why I think this is possible. And man, I'm just so curious about what the real story is regarding the supernatural and its connection to us and the afterlife. And, Sasquatch is mixed up in this whole thing because I happen to be totally into the woods, and they are too. I don't think it limits their availability to communicate with you if you don't live in the woods. I think they can still access you in certain ways. But, we got to start naming these things what they are. And the only thing you can really do is say that the others, whatever they are, don't like to be classified. They don't like to be studied. They don't like to be filmed. And I have a friend, and she says the secrets like to keep themselves. Well, that's really it. I mean, these secrets like to keep themselves.
That's a brilliant way to put it. I like that.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's how everything started for me. But then you got my audience here. They don't really know what drove you from being a musician to an artist to really pursuing this. I mean, was it your wife having an incident that really kind of sparked the interest with you to get on the radio and start asking more questions? Or tell people the timeline for you and how you even got up to Pandamonium.
Oh, wow. Well, it was, after writing my first book, I've always been interested in the paranormal, and I always, paid attention to in search of when I was a kid, and folklore was huge for me. I always loved folklore before I even knew what folklore was. I was always asking about ghost stories and stuff when I was a kid, and I always wanted to go to the places. If someone said, this mill is haunted, there's a ghost there. Well, I wanted to go to that mill. I wanted to go there and see it. I didn't the story wasn't enough. I always wanted to be at that place, which I suppose I'm still doing now. Just, I run recorders when I do it. But the first book, I wrote a lot about stuff, and I was writing a lot about local legends, and I found so much. And more Bigfoot stuff. I've always been interested in the Bigfoot phenomena and had no idea how much there was around me. And that kind of got me fired up. And I had this idea to do sort of an audio documentary, and that's all I wanted to do. I didn't mean to start a podcast, really. I wanted to take my first book and make a kind of audio documentary out of it and just give it to another podcast to air. I just wanted to make this thing, and I bugged a couple of other podcasts, and finally Soraya from Where Did the Road Go said, Tim, just make your own podcast. just make your own thing. Just do it yourself. I'll help you. And he did. He helped me get started. He gave me access to his audience. Without Soraya, there would be no Strange Familiars. So that started that. And I knew, okay, I want to go to places and run audio while I'm there. I know I want to do that. I want to do these on-site things. But the question is where to go, so some of these places you just can't get access to, and how to do it and so forth. And while all this is happening, and I think we did talk about this on your show last time I was on, it's this is when I was hiking and I found that area of crushed quartz. It was bright white quartz that looked like something had been sitting there and smashing it. And a few of the rocks were kind of stacked into like a little cairn. And I changed it, and this started a ongoing exchange of changing these rocks around, which for months I believed was a human doing it with me, until one day it just became very obvious that it could have been still a human, I guess, but they're very quick and ninja-like. If it was a person,
Right.
They had to have been watching me from the woods, because I changed them and I left and was back within 15 or 20 minutes, and a big leaf was under the rock, the cairn I made. And I know it wasn't there before 100%. Leaves don't fall under rocks. It's just not what they do. So, I was at that point, I became very, very interested. And knew that something was going on, that I was playing a game with something. And at this point, I probably, if you would have asked me then at that point, I would have probably said, oh, it has to be Bigfoot. Now I'm a little more like, well, I don't know what it was. I know something's moving rocks around, but I don't know exactly what it was. And so that really got me excited, because now, well, it's kind of like what you have. We have this interchange going on. You get this feedback. You get feedback, and
Right.
it's something's replying to you. You're having an exchange of something, and that really fired me up. And from there, I just started to look for other places. And it's like you say with these. A lot of times, it's these place names. If there's a reason why things are called the things are called. Pandemonium's a good example. Hex Hollow is a good example. I tracked sightings of weird stuff in Hex Hollow to long before it was ever called Hex Hollow. It's called Raymire Valley. There was a famous murder associated with it, that the local powwow tradition. It's kind of like a folk magic tradition. And a guy got murdered. They thought he was a witch in 1928, I believe. And then they called it Hex Hollow after that, because it was they called it the Hex murder and so forth. But even before that murder ever took place, they were having weird sightings in that valley. So, folklore plays a part in all this. I think folklore was the way of our ancestors had of discussing a lot of this paranormal stuff. They might have used different names, but if you look at it, boy, it seems like they're really describing a lot of these same things.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go back to Pandemonium, because as I'm listening to this and I'm hearing Pandemonium basically break out like a fever all around you, I'm like, oh my God, here we go. I mean, I just pictured, like, the old pioneers scratching their head as like their pickaxe disappears, and saying, oh, this is other Pandemonium. And, these conversations that, I don't know if that's why they named it that, but it seems though that this is why they name some of these places after, more often than not, kind of spooky names. Not that Pandemonium is necessarily spooky, but Devil's Creek, or, Devil's Hollow, or, Goblin Shore, all these, crazy names. Basically, the white man came along and settled them in and started making maps and naming, stuff. So yeah, it's incredible. But okay, so I'm just going to fire away. Here you are, and I'm going to speak to this too here, investing time and effort into a podcast to look into these, we'll call them mystery schools, these
Mm-hmm.
mystery schools of thought. And there's not a lot of women out there doing this. I can maybe think of like 5 women doing paranormal podcasts that are doing it regularly, weekly, whatever. I don't know if there's way more than that. It seems like most of the time guys are interested in this subject. And I think it goes way deeper than the fact that they just maybe like mysteries or strange, creepy stuff. I think it gets into what you and I were speaking about via text, about kind of being masters of their own domain. And your ego is, served by this type of promise that you're going to understand things more than your brother and next to you and your neighbor. And it gets into kind of the Lord of the Rings theory, right? That the ring is this burden, and the ring bearer has this burden, but these incredible powers here. And we talked about people that are kind of ring bearers right now that aren't so nice. And
Yeah.
we used other words for that, but it really is true. And I think it's something I'm always cautious about, that this is not abnormal, and I am not unique or special to have experienced it. I'm just maybe crazy and curious enough to talk about it.
Right.
What do you think?
I think it's a great point. Stepping back just to what you said about women, I think this goes back into our history where, women who did this stuff were always witches. They were always said to be witches. I think women might have more of an intuitive understanding of it. Whereas, like you said, men are like, let's solve this. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
No, yeah, you're totally right. I think there's more of a negative label based upon what you just said towards women. Yeah, and guys can get away with it more.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe, like I said, maybe they have an intuitive understanding where we are more like, like you said, let's try to figure this out. I do not try to own it. It will own you if you try to own it. Certainly. We were talking about people becoming obsessed with it, and it happens in spirit contact in other forms too. I personally, I'm at the place where, I believe this is some sort of spirit contact that's going on. And again, I do believe Sasquatch is somehow involved in this.
Hmm.
I don't know if Sasquatch is a spirit entity. Sometimes I think it is. Sometimes I think it certainly acts like one in some ways. As a big folklore guy, if you read
Hmm.
about what they call the Earth Wights in Germanic mythology, the behaviors and the responses I've experienced are a heck of a lot like what the folklore reports in those cases. But yeah, is it the same thing or just something similar? I don't know. I really don't know. But it is dangerous in a few different ways, and you can become obsessed. And I think another thing you said, which is very important, is that anyone can experience this stuff. And I try to tell people that no one has superpowers. You can develop those skills yourself. No one has any kind of powers that you can't develop. Some people have practiced these skills and developed them and refined them, and some people are going to be better. It's like artwork. Some people are going to be, or
Hmm.
musicians. Some people are just going to be better artists and musicians, no matter how much other people practice. Some people just have a tendency or a skill towards those things. But I don't think anybody really has superpowers. I think this is there for everyone to access. It's not something that only we can do.
And I've seen this before, and I bet you have too. There's people that have a definitive tone to them about who's in charge and what the message really means, and they're there to interpret it for you. Not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily for a fee, but you get the impression that there is no other way but their way to understand this. And I've seen that happen. I think you have too.
Oh yeah.
That leads to misogyny usually, and some kind of cult mentality, however soft the cult is. But we went up to ECETI Ranch and we did our retreat a month ago, and we ended up debunking some stuff from this incredibly hotspot of paranormal activity. Not that I wanted to do that, but because there's such group think about what's going on there, there's no way I could present that to all of the followers of the ECETI Ranch and what's going on in Mount Adams. I didn't want to do it. I just happened to, feel that this is the most likely thing that has happened here. So yeah, just take that issue and kind of shrink it down into your own example. Like, I think I see an airplane there and not a UFO, but this person worships UFOs, so therefore it is a freaking UFO.
Mm-hmm.
So you just kind of, Ron Moorhead says it best. And Wes Germer brought this up too on his show, and Ron should be credited for this line. Here is how you get out of an argument with someone who is like what I described. You turn to him like Ron said, you turn to him like Ron does and say, you could be right. You never know. And then just let it lie. And it's not going to drive him crazy, but you're not arguing with them. You're just giving them a polite way to say, I'm going to go another direction dealing with this. So that's what I've done. It certainly helped out quite a bit. And then I'm always just trying to get clarity over an issue rather than agreement. I just want to be clear on what, how someone feels, not necessarily agree with them, and have them totally, feel as though they understand how clear my point of view is and not necessarily agree or disagree with me. It's just all about really stating where you are in the moment. And so those are just some maybe helpful tricks for people that are struggling with this. And I still struggle with it too. In fact, even in the podcast I just put out, I think I went after the apers pretty hard because I get fed up, and that's probably a derogatory name to them. But people that believe that this is hard science, flesh and blood, relic hominid, I see them as basically like the government hoodwinking the American people over the proof of UFOs. Here we are now with naval disclosure based upon what happened on the USS Nimitz and a whole lot more than that. And then they're just kind of softly saying, oh yeah, we've been lying to you the whole time. We know they're out there, but we're in control of the message here. Well, the people in control of the message over Sasquatch remind me a lot of that mentality.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I have to agree totally with that. So when you first started with this, were you approaching it as it's purely a flesh and blood entity?
No, man. And it because the frame 352, when Patty turns and looks at the camera,
Hmm.
That was an alien to me, man. That did not look like anything that should look at you with that kind of recognition. That was inside the animal kingdom. That was inside the paranormal section of the library. It was right next to time travel and UFOs that you find
Right.
the Bigfoot book. So that was my early understanding. It's like, well, obviously these things exist. That can't be hoaxed footage. But how many are there? How popular is the actual phenomena? I had no idea about the numbers that were involved as far as how frequent sightings are. And you don't have to live in the Pacific Northwest to have frequent sightings. What I think is important to talk about, and what you and I maybe want to talk about too, is working with people that know locations where the others come to visit more often than not. Now, in my case, it was learning that working with habituators or people that were long-term witnesses that had the backyard Bigfoot phenomena had the stories about the supernatural and the paranormal.
Yep.
But most of the time, they would talk about it. In fact, I had a Navy SEAL, I've told this story before, maybe to my audience, but one of the first long-term witnesses I spoke to was on SEAL Team 2. His name's Earl Kelso. He lives up Blue River. I hope he's still with us. He's an awesome veteran. And he had disappearing footprints in the snow. And he said, how to do that? And I said, well, how would I know? But I've heard this story before. And that's a whole section of supernatural paranormal stuff that happened on the Kelso property as well. But he had no investment in pulling one over me. He had the photographs in hand. He just wanted to know how the heck something evaded through 2 feet of snow, and there's no sign of any tracks. So
Right.
that's where I think your bread and butter is to get involved with this. Is don't be a bullshit artist to get on the property of a long-term witness. And they know, first of all, and the Sasquatch, they definitely know an a-hole from a mile away, and they sniff it out long before you get there. But, you
See,
know,
that's super interesting. I have heard that before.
yeah, okay, go ahead.
No,
I'll
I'm
let
just
you.
saying, like, just I don't have a particular example, but people have told me like they will suss out intention.
I have a buddy that went to a long-term witness, and the long-term witness lived not too far from the Al Moon Lab. And the witness said he had a portal in his backyard. Now, I never got to meet this guy, but this friend of mine, this dude went up to this long-term witness, and he got on his property, and the guy met him at the gate. And he looked at the investigator, we'll call him, and he said, "Are you real?" That was his first question to this guy when he walked up to him. And he didn't know if he was like, well, are you hallucinating and not thinking I'm real? Where do I go with a question like that? And the guy says, no, no, no. I just want to know if you're authentic. Are you real? And that authenticity, that realness, I think goes a long way in getting the kind of activity that you and I have had. I think it explains why a lot of people that experience the supernatural and the paranormal and don't have a necessarily negative experience with it get closer to it, understand it better, and then have it kind of follow them.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's very, very interesting. It's very it's just interesting that I've heard that from other people, over time, like that, like the others, they
Mhm.
know your intention. They know your intention, and intention has become a very interesting part of all this. I do believe it plays into it to the point where this was a question I was going to get to with you in a little bit, but we might as well get to it here. Is there a co-creative element to this,
As far as interacting with it,
as far as it needing us to be there
okay.
to manifest in some way?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think so. You know, it's so tailor made for the individual that you have to wonder why. That's why it's, in my opinion, so hard to prove to anybody, is that when you have a tailor-made suit, it
Yep.
fits you.
Hmm.
You notice all the imperfection and perfections of the suit, and that's what we're talking about here. These long-term witnesses have these tailor-made activities where it's not enough activity or proof or evidence to show your neighbor, but enough to tell them, "Hey, I'm still around, you bozo." Um, and so there does seem this longing to communicate. Now, that's only because of the frequency that they've yearned to communicate on our behalf. And it has to have something to do with where you live. I mean, this stuff doesn't seem to happen to, oh, I don't know. I mean, it does happen in hotel rooms and it happens in businesses. It's not just confined to people that live out in the woods. But if we're just to narrow it down to the others being Sasquatch, I mean, obviously you're going to have more activity when you're in their backyard, which is where our backyards are out in the woods. But when it comes to the UFO phenomena, I mean, you listen to some of the stories that Whitley Strieber will tell. I mean, they take you and share experiences with you in the middle of traffic.
Hmm.
I have a story that unfortunately I deleted accidentally off of my hard drive after I interviewed a guy that had missing time in the middle of LA traffic. And it went on and on down the rabbit hole there. Totally compelling story. But yeah, middle of LA traffic, him and his wife were taken. So does it confine itself to just one location? Does it need you to interact with it? Yeah, I think so. There seems to be like this invitation to understand and draw closer. The dangerous part of it is that you have to leave behind everything from this physical world in order to do it. Now, does that mean you off yourself? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you have to shed your worldly goods, your worldly experiences, and you have to really go 24/7 because that's how they want it. They the real hardcore supernatural experiences, to really get close to it, you have to kind of like lose everything in order to invest it, and I'm just not willing to do that. Some people have done that before, certainly there's authors that have spoken about that. But yeah, it's nothing that I've done, but I came close to toying with really going super down the rabbit hole. I mean, super deep. And I don't think it's worth doing for everybody. It may not be worth doing for any human.
Yeah, yeah. I think Keel towards the end there was kind of warning people a little bit about that. I remember seeing an interview with him at I want to say it was one of the early Mothman festivals, one of the first,
Mhm.
one or two that he actually made it to before he died. And someone was kind of asking him like, "How do I like get in deep with this stuff?" And he just was, "Why would you want to?" he,
Right.
he was very very much backed off. He's just like, I don't see why you would want to do that. Which sometimes I can definitely see. I feel like there's a seduction to it, that if you're interested in it at all, uh, I had that synchronicity storm around the rabid raccoon attack, which I've talked about on both of our shows, which really kind of pushed me back a little bit. It made me take a pause, and just because of all the weird synchronicities and the number of synchronicities that surrounded it, and because my son was with me when it happened, which I did not like at all, obviously. And it really made me take a step back. And then, but I just find myself being like drawn back into it. Like, what is this? What is this? And then when you can get these interchanges and these responses and so forth, it's very, very seductive, I find.
Yeah, I've just learned to keep it light. If I feel like it's not light anymore, chances are that it's probably my fault for making it a heavy, deep
Hmm.
moment. And
Hmm.
it's always ego adrift, male ego adrift, when I feel myself getting too damn serious about this whole thing. So we try to keep it light. Here's an example of how we keep it light. So I have a little music box. It's just a little bit of Wizard of Oz for everybody. And we play a music box once in a while out in the woods here because it kind of sets the tone for the fact that it's silly to bring a music box out in the woods and play it. But it's kind of my reminder, that I really don't have a brain in comparison to what's going on with the phenomena here. And there's stronger, better, smarter people that invested a whole lot more time and money in this than I have. And I'm just going to scratch the surface of this veil. So, yeah. And I have a great woman in my life and a great family in my life, and they keep me grounded. Now, granted, I say that, and these incredible things that have happened to both of us, myself and Erin, my girlfriend, it's hard to stay totally grounded, but you certainly have to debunk stuff. And that's the other thing I wanted to talk about, and maybe you can talk about that too, is you kind of expect the weird to happen and you're looking for synchronicity because darn it, there is synchronicity and this tailor-made phenomena with you, but it's not always. And you have to go back and you have to say, okay, that's not what this is. I just have to publicly say, I made a mistake. This is not what's going on, and own up to it. Now, in our case, I told you privately when we did this gift exchange of sorts, you found a spring, and you mentioned that you found a bed spring attached to a paracord.
Hmm.
And I didn't think I'd ever heard that until your podcast, but I went over the text messages again, and you absolutely mentioned the fact that you found a bed spring attached to this piece of paracord. Now, I thought somehow, some way, I made this little tiny bed spring out of a little piece of wire. And I don't remember ever hearing you say that, but the fact is that I made this little spring, and I thought somehow it was connected to the supernatural that I would do that out here in Washington State. So that's an example of bleed over. I think, you don't know what you've heard subconsciously and what's affected you. So you have to, be your own worst critic when it comes to this kind of stuff. I don't know if you have any examples of you jumping to conclusions.
Well, I suffer from ready to believe syndrome. I think, uh, so I need people like my wife around
Yeah.
to keep me grounded and to say, well, wait a minute, could it have been this? Could it have been that? She's heard the Pandamonium stories, for instance. And to be clear, we were talking about the text message about the spring. That was after I was in Pandamonium, but before you made the spring. So I wasn't talking about springs before I was in Pandamonium.
Well, I must have made that spring right after you said that because the jawbones had already disappeared. And we haven't even got into the fact that we have some disappearing jawbones, but we can talk about that soon. But yeah, I think I was subconsciously filtered in a message and then unconsciously made this little wire spring.
Mm.
See how weird all these conversations get? I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
we
it's
the
so
crap we
difficult.
talk about. Yeah,
It's so difficult to talk about because it's not a straight line. This is not a linear line. This is a cobweb, and these little webs shoot off in every different direction. And you have to go. You go down this path. And you go, well, wait a minute. We have to go back and go down this other path so you understand this path I started down before. It's very difficult
right.
to tell this stuff in a kind of linear way. But no, so for instance, my wife with Pandemonium, she will say, "How do you think that person got up into your camp and did that?" She absolutely believes me when I say I found the spring there and so forth. But she's just, to her, it had to be a person. Like a person came up into our campsite that night. Whereas me, I'm like, I don't know what it was, and I don't think it could have been a person. If it was a person, they're very, very brave. But I can't say it wasn't. I wasn't awake. I didn't see whatever put that spring there. So, it's good to have people like Allison around me. So I think to kind of throw that other perspective in there on a consistent basis.
Yeah, it's a bummer sometimes when sometimes it's just a bummer because it's so tailor made, and these moments. You were there when it happened. You experienced how quiet it was until that moment. You know how difficult it would be for someone to do that, and how brave. You said brave. I believe they'd have to be brave as well to do something like that. It's the consistency of not only the type of gifts, but for example, we were talking about Mylar balloons.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that you've found a Mylar balloon in the woods, and maybe you found more than one Mylar balloon in the same area, and asked me if that's a thing. And I said, absolutely. There's an area less than 80 miles from here where It's a total Bigfoot hotspot. And there is a nest of mylar balloons that show up consistently below the 10-foot level through a thick tree canopy of Doug firs. Now, why would a consistent amount of mylar balloons all show up in the same area of dense canopy near the Mount Rainier forest? And not only there in a Bigfoot hotspot, but all over the world. And not only mylar balloons, but things that are shiny,
Yeah.
toys and trinkets. Watch David Paulides' Missing 411 movie, the first one, and they find a Rubik's Cube where a child disappeared. That Rubik's Cube, I don't think, was there when the search party went there. There's this consistency of objects and things that are interesting showing up in hotspots where the others are. And I think you're absolutely right. But if you told somebody you found a mylar balloon, they'd be like, well, they got to land somewhere, dude. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that's when, and this is on Pandamonium 3, which is a patron episode, but you can hear Chad. I stop him and I say, wait a minute, is that a Mylar balloon? And he goes, yeah, why? Because he's new to all this stuff. He hasn't read all the literature and so forth. I say to him, take a picture of that. I'll tell you in a minute. And, he takes a photograph of it. And then I go into this like, hey, I know this sounds batty, but Bigfoot people are saying they find these mylar balloons around in these hot spots. And here's a mylar balloon in the woods. I believe this was at the base of a tree. Yeah, could it have blown there or in some way gotten there? Yeah, it could have, but where it showed up is certainly interesting.
Uh, we had a mylar balloon in the house that I got for Erin for, I believe, her birthday. And it had lost its helium, and it was time to get rid of this giant heart balloon, I think it was, something to that effect. And she threw it away. And a couple days later, I think it was less than a week, we go on a walk on our property. And for some reason, I had this thought in my head, look for a mylar balloon out here. And so I'm uncomfortable saying that was, well, uncomfortable. Is that the right word? No, it's not the right word. I guess I doubted the fact that was anything other than my imagination saying, hey, look for a mylar balloon. I don't know what it was except my imagination. But I had that thought, and Aaron turns around and says, oh my God, is that a mylar balloon? And it's hanging off of a tree below a thick canopy about 15 feet off of one of our trails. And it is a balloon that hasn't been cut or ripped through the tree canopy. And it had some kind of congratulatory happy birthday message on it. And there it was. So, it's those kind of moments where you scratch your head and say, what the heck? But I would never even think this way had it not been all of the other complete craziness that happened in Cottage Grove, Oregon, and happens up here.
Right,
So
right.
once it happens, it's hard to filter out what's legitimate and what's not legitimate.
Mm-hmm. Did I tell you the story about the psychic and me and the Bigfoot energy and the acorns? Did I tell you that story?
No.
Oh, I've told it on Strange Familiars, but your audience may enjoy this. I was invited to there's a local ghost hunting group, and they invited me to come out. They were researching the cemetery. Now, this cemetery is in the middle of a town. This is not a rural area in any way. It's in the middle of a busy part of town. And they wanted me to give a little talk, and I just gave a little talk. And then I was signing books and stuff. And then at some point, the main guy from the group came up to me. He said, "Hey, our psychic's out back, and he's doing a session out there. If you want to go, observe that, I'll watch your books for you." I was like, "Yeah, that sounds interesting. I'll go do that." He's out there, and he was sitting on a grave, kind of meditating, and he was channeling, something. And I'm nothing if not a little mischievous, maybe, but not. I don't think I'm negative, but I was like, I'm willing to play around with this stuff. So I thought, like, I wonder what happens. I'm going to stand here and I'm just going to concentrate all my energy on manifesting a Bigfoot, and maybe I'll get a scream. Maybe we'll get something. Let's see what happens. Let's just play with this and see what happens. And so he's sitting there meditating, and I'm just standing there, just concentrating all my energy, just trying to like summon a Bigfoot, essentially. And after a few minutes, he opens his eyes and he looks right at me. So I was standing off to the side, maybe 20 yards from him. He opens his eyes, he turns, looks right at me, and he says, "Your aura right now is absolutely huge." So, so this is after I'm trying to manifest
Right.
the Bigfoot energy. So then, we're talking a little bit, and he was doing like some Reiki on a woman and stuff, and we're just having a nice conversation. And there was this clump of leaves that was there, and something said, and again, it's not like I heard a voice, but something told me there's something under those leaves for you. So you need to pick that up and look. So I picked it up, and I'm looking around, and now it's getting pretty dark. So I'm kind of like digging around. I think I had my cell phone light I was using to kind of look under there. And the psychic walks up. He's like, what is that? What are you doing? I said, I don't know. There's something here. There's something here. And I picked up a little acorn. Okay, not an acorn on the ground, big deal. But we were done out there, and we turned and walked, and there's a house on the cemetery grounds. And I walked directly from finding that acorn. I put it in my pocket. I walked around the corner and into the kitchen of this house, and the psychic is right behind me. And on the kitchen floor, inside the house, is a huge acorn. Just sitting there. I bent over, I picked it up, I turned around, and his eyes got so big. I said, "See that?" I said, I don't know. I don't know what that's about, but it's the acorn inside the house.
There's something about acorns, because there is a moment here that I related to you about a magic acorn as well. And if you look at some of these, other gods, in particular, I believe it's Cernunnos, an acorn is present on this god in between his crown. That's a whole other story. It's probably too long to tell here right now, but there's something about acorns. I don't know what it is. We would get filberts or hazelnuts down in Cottage Grove set in weird spots, but up here it's magic acorns periodically. Well, only on one occasion, but yeah, I sympathize with that moment.
It was just completely bizarre, and I was so happy the psychic was walking right behind me, because I just picked it up and I just said, "This is like, this kind of stuff happens. I don't know." He's like, because he's like, "What's that about?" I'm like, "I don't know what it's about. I just, there was, your acorn moment after." But I got a big kick out of him just opening his eyes and saying, "Your aura is huge right now." I was like, "That's fantastic."
Now, was the acorn set in the middle of the floor? Was it set on the threshold of a doorway? How was it?
Dead in the middle of the kitchen floor.
Yeah.
There was no missing it. There was no missing it. And it was a huge one. The one I found outside was little, and this one was like quite a large acorn. There was no missing it.
And that kind of smacks of just as far as like this weird behavior of stacking things in order or kind of putting them in weird, obvious places is, tantamount to poltergeist activity, where they would, stack chairs up in a neat row, or Sasquatch has that, if we're calling this Sasquatch activity, not necessarily, but if you watch any show on Bigfoot long term, for example, Finding Bigfoot, they would go to these eyewitnesses' place and they would describe things like chicken heads all stacked in a row, or 7 mice all wrapped up in leaves and set on people's doorsteps all in a row, or putting things right dead center in the middle of a doorway. So poltergeist meets Bigfoot meets all this other stuff. There seems to be a real attention to detail, and that gets into, what's his name? The guy that wrote the autism theory.
Yeah, I was just going to bring him up. Christopher Noel. Noel or Noel? Yeah.
Yeah, one of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And he speaks of such things, but that's what we're familiar with, is this real attention to detail, to say, this is the middle of the doorway exactly, and they can't miss this,
Right.
So.
Well, in your last episode, you described that silly putty egg that was buried, and then every stone. So here's the two options: either something unburied it and placed every stone back in the exact position it was in, or something reached through the ground and left a fingerprint. It's crazy.
Well,
right?
It gets into magic and quantum physics. Science meets magic real quick. That's why if you ever get a chance to interview Henry Franzoni, who's this Native American environmental scientist from Washington, who really was my first mentor in understanding that there was magic involved with this phenomena. He talks about the idea that when these things manifest, they're in a certain vibrational state and they're able to reach through matter. That's what explains a lot of these pops, cracks, hits. We would get those constantly, and I spoke about that in that last episode. Some of them are subtle, some of them are big. I don't know if wood knocks are necessarily monkeys, monkey men hitting trees with
Right.
wood. They're definitely the sound of wood expanding and popping. But for example, in one of the audio files that we're going to play tonight, it's the fence stomp crack one. There is no prelude to these giant footsteps coming up to the parabolic microphone. The only prelude to it is this pop.
Hmm.
And out of this pop erupt a single bounding footstep and a vocal. And then it fades off naturally into the distance. But we would get that time and time again. We get this at the house, right? Like 5 minutes, maybe even 3 minutes before I wake up sometime, before my alarm goes off at 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning, we'll get a pop or a snap or what some people would call a slap on the house. And it's the weird timing of it all. Like it knows that my alarm is going to go off, right? And it's going to pop through or slap the house beforehand. That's why when you say, this is a cobweb instead of a straight line, that's such a perfect way to put it. And we have to, what I always told my audience at Strange Brow is that to really understand the weirdness of it all, you have to forget what you've learned about time. And you have to reorganize the fact that these events have already happened in their world and they're appreciating it totally different. And that gets into Ron Moorhead's neck of the woods and Quani Laparitis and all these other forefathers of understanding the paranormal Sasquatch phenomena. But it's hard to communicate these ideas to people that are out looking for a giant, silverback gorilla.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the other point that I think is very important that you point out, and I've pointed this out before, it wasn't an original concept to me. I think I heard Wes say it and picked up on it as absolutely true when I heard him say it, is if and when they're a hunter and they see one walk by them in the woods, and they're driving down the street and they get a roadside crossing or something.
Mm-hmm.
I do not blame these people for a second for thinking it's just a natural animal, because to them that's all they saw. They saw something physical and solid walk by them or standing by the side of the road or whatever it was. But as you pointed out, when you get people with these repeat visits, they're coming on their property, they have an opportunity to be around them on a regular basis, then I don't want to say always, but then you very often get this other weird phenomenon with it, to the point where when I talk to witnesses like that, they're surprised that I'm not surprised when they say, "Oh, my house is haunted also."
Right.
It's like, of course it is. Yeah, that goes right along with it. Absolutely. But
Oh yeah. Yeah. Totally.
it's these repeat witnesses that will bring up the weird stuff and say, like, yeah, this other weird stuff is happening. I'm seeing these weird lights all the time. I'm seeing this, et cetera, et cetera. That's a very, very important point, because like I said, if it's just a hunter in the woods who sees one walk by, I don't blame them for thinking they're natural. I don't blame them for a second. But
Right.
so much of the other stories point to there being something more or something different about them.
I'm trying to find the clip here. There's an interview I did. I spoke earlier about Earl Kelso and the disappearing tracks in the snow. I got access to a place in Vida, Oregon, and met the neighbors. I asked the neighbors whether or not they knew Earl, and they said, no, we don't. They're about 5 houses down from him. There was a highway in front of their house and a large mountain that led to the Cascade Mountains behind them. And I spoke to the story is going a little bit backwards right now. I actually met Earl first. I met these witnesses first and then met Earl afterwards. So I introduced myself to Earl because of this woman named Mary and Chad. And they had Bigfoot activity. And that's why I went and introduced myself to Earl to see if I could get access to the mountain. So Mary and Chad were long-term witnesses, and they would have activity in the back of their house on the hillside there. And Chad liked to smoke a lot of weed and drink a lot of booze and raise pit bulls.
Oh.
And it was driving him nuts. But he's this big, alpha male that's not going to take no S from anybody. Meanwhile, the pit bulls are cowering in their cages when the sun goes down and Chad starts popping off shots towards something racing back and forth in the woods. And Mary is a long-term witness as a child. So she knows this phenomenon exists. She had her sighting on the coast in Oregon. She actually saw one pleasure himself in the woods. So she was quite traumatized by that experience. Now, I mention that because it makes the story way more compelling that a husband and wife would approach you at a pizza parlor and know what you're doing at this pizza parlor, in my case, having a Bigfoot meeting, and then in a straight face tell me this story that she saw a Sasquatch as a little girl pleasuring himself. And the reason she told me that is because she had a house full of kids and she didn't want them to ever see anything that crazy. Here they have Bigfoot activity, right?
Mhm.
Right down the street from this pizza parlor. The reason I mention this is because Mary pulled me aside and said, I have lights coming into my bedroom at night. And I said, okay, what kind of lights, Mary? And she's like, well, they're little white lights that they go through the window. They don't need the window to be open. They go through the wall. They fly around our house. And then I'll look out the window and I'll see a Sasquatch sitting kind of Indian style, watching up at the bay window where the kids sleep. So she's completely freaked out by the fact that, her kids are going to see a Bigfoot do the unthinkable.
Right.
And this is where I think this is probably 2010, 2009. And this is really where the rails went off as far as the supernatural. When I really first experienced it was out at Mary and Chad's house. And we saw this giant organic light display happen up in it was an old helipad that went defunct up in the woods there that we had access to. So we stayed up all night, waited for sign to happen. And I knew that there was sign up on the hill. I knew that these people weren't telling me BS because I had my own share of experiences on my way up to the campsite over a period of months. My tent was stuck up in a tree. It was moved 35 feet from where I'd put it on the helipad and put about 8 feet up and 30 feet away in a tree about a half hour after I put it there. And then we're sitting at the top of this hillside at 11:30 at night watching the Cascade and McKenzie River and the full moon. And we see this 50-foot, at least this 50-foot arc welder light explode about 200 feet in front of us, in front of the tree line, and stair step through the woods. And each time it exploded without a sound, it was this piercing white angelic light that you could look straight into. And it was just absolutely amazing. One of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen at that point. And that is when I started to pay attention more, that these things are possible. And I forget where I was going with this whole thing, but it points to the fact that long-term witnesses, if you can get access to someone that has activity and befriend them in an authentic way and learn from them instead of going in saying, well, I'm going to tell you exactly what's going on here. It's just not the right approach for meeting anybody over any issue.
Right.
Chances are that they know a whole lot more than you because they're living with it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to me too how they tiptoe up to it because if I'm called, so I'm called there, say, because I'm the Bigfoot guy, I'm the local guy for Bigfoot, right? So they might contact Lon from Phantoms and Monsters, and he'll have me go out and investigate, or they might find me because of my books, or however they find me. They find me and say, I saw Bigfoot, I want to talk to you about it, or I go out and I meet them on their property, and they ease up to the weird stuff because I don't know whether I don't think most people have allowed themselves to think it's more than a natural animal, even though there's all this other weird stuff going on. They don't connect it. In other words, they will tell all the Bigfoot stories that sound like make it sound like it's a natural animal, and then they'll get to the weird lights, or they'll get to the haunting, or very rarely will I have to say, so is your house haunted, or is there do you see weird lights or anything like that? Every now and then I'll say that, and almost always the answer is yes. almost always, if it's a repeat witness. One recently, again, she was talking like, again, like they're natural creatures, and where do they live, and well, they must be staying in this part of the woods, and they must be eating this and eating that, and I'm just okay, like I'm not arguing with her or anything. I'm just, tell me your stories. And then towards the end of the day, I said, so what else happens? You get weird lights around here? Oh yeah, we get weird lights. And I said, any haunted houses? And she said, well, my house is haunted. And then her neighbor, who was talking to me all day about Bigfoot stuff, he'd had several encounters. He's like, oh yeah, my house is haunted too. And it's just, of course, of course. I don't tell them, sometimes I tell them I think it's all related, and that's about as far as I'll go. I don't tell them I think it's completely connected, which is the point where I am now. But I do say, well, I think all this stuff is somehow related. But again and again, I run into this, and it's not surprising. It's always interesting. It's always exciting, but it's not surprising anymore. I'm just waiting for the weird light stories.
Well, don't you think it's going to take a big name in the community to really talk about their own personal experience? I mean, we need someone who has a lot of camera time, who's, on all the speaker circuits, to finally give a presentation on the connective tissue of all this stuff. And that just hasn't happened yet, because somehow, some way, they feel as though they're talking about something way less weird than that. But as a reminder to the general public, these people are chasing fairy tales, and they might as well be out looking for, well, it's hard for me to say anything isn't real anymore. I almost said looking for leprechauns, but now I'm like, well, there are these stories about little people, so might turn out to eat some crow on that one. But yeah, I just think that it's going to take one of these bigger names to talk about something publicly, like at one of these conferences. Certainly the UFO people are way, and this is something Tom Powell mentioned. And if you haven't had Tom on your show or advertised any of Tom's work, Tom Powell's been talking about this for years, that groups like MUFON are light years away from us as far as organization and being able to talk about these other phenomena being connected. Whitley Strieber talks about ghosts being connected to the UFO phenomena. Linda Moulton Howe talks about Bigfoot being connected to the UFO phenomena. Skinwalker Ranch, George Knapp, all this stuff with Jeremy Corbell doing the documentary about Skinwalker Ranch. They talk specifically about government funding, over $20 million being siphoned to Bigelow Industries and studying the Skinwalker Ranch. And there's a tremendous amount of evidence that they had exactly what's going on at that ranch on larger doses than we did. But, we would call the Al Moon Lab a skin twin, because so much of the activity mimicked what they were able to study. I mean, they were able to study it in a way that very few people are able to study it, because they threw so much money and time at it. But you don't get, Harry Reid to siphon $22 million towards something unless he's connected to something authentic. And a lot of reasons that program was, I guess, halted in some degree was based upon, and if you watch the Skinwalker Ranch documentary, and George Knapp talks about this, is that there were religious elements within the Pentagon that said that what people were investigating was demonic, and that they didn't want that money allocated towards the devil's work, something to that degree. Now, they could be right. Who am I to say? This could be a giant cat and mouse game, right? I tend to think not, because my life has reaped only benefits, and I'm more happy now than I've ever been, because I'm doing exactly what I love. And you and I spoke about that too. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, and absolutely. Yeah, I feel like I didn't find myself till I was in my 30s, quite honestly. I had some of that's completely, normal run of the mill family issues and stuff that maybe not normal, but normal within the scope of, not paranormal stuff. And some of it is just, finding a sort of home, for myself, and where I want to be, and what I want to do. and being very comfortable with this stuff. I'm very comfortable about talking about this stuff to the point where I'll walk up to strangers sometimes and just, if I'm meeting somebody on a trail, say for instance, and we get to talking, it won't be long before I'll mention that I'm into weird stuff and ask them if they've experienced anything strange. So it's, I found my home, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to have someone that has something in common with me and not feel either threatened by, the kind of information that I'm presenting and vice versa. I'm not threatened by this at all, but there's a lot of people that are threatened by what you and I are talking about. And the best way to deal with it is to just absolutely go silent on it and not acknowledge its existence. And I get that to a degree, but we live in a new time now where disclosure is present. We no longer get the X-Files music when a UFO segment comes up on the nightly news. Generally, that was the case before, but now I think this Area 51 event actually is going to be a yearly thing out in Nevada, and I think that's probably going to turn into more and more transparency. I don't know if you saw the footage of people actually walking up to the Area 51 gate with local law enforcement and Area 51 employees waiting with smiles on their face for the public to come up. Like they've been waiting years, to be able to talk about this in some degree. And people want to share ideas. That's our natural way to do it. It's not compartmentalizing things like the government does. And you can see how frustrated Bob Lazar is regarding Area 51. He talks about how he thinks constantly to this day about still being at S4, looking at back engineering technology from alien craft, and how frustrating it is to no longer be a part of it. But he went on to say that it was the compartmentalization of not being able to work with other people and exchange ideas about what's going on there and how much of a crime it is to keep this, away from humanity. And I feel that. I think that it is a crime to humanity. I think we deserve to know exactly what's going on here without the algorithms pointing to social collapse. What's your thoughts?
My thought is part of the, I'm not even sure how to phrase it. Part of the government's deal with this, part of their muddying the waters constantly, is because I truly believe they don't have all the answers. I don't believe there's a magical security clearance that you get and then you know everything. I don't believe that at all. I believe they're very curious in this stuff, into the phenomena in general, and they would like us to believe they know a lot more than we do. And the reality may be that they know different things than we do, but not more. And I don't think they have all the answers. That's just my gut feeling. My gut feeling is I don't trust the government, and I don't trust them to ever disclose anything. But it's not because they have the answers and won't. It's because they need us to think that they have the answers. It's beneficial for them to always have the populace thinking that the government knows everything. We're safe. They know what's going on. It's not beneficial for them to come out and say, we don't know what Bigfoot is. We will admit it exists. We have researched it. We don't know what UFOs are. We'll admit they exist. We have no clue. Although apparently they did that with that Tic Tac video. But I think
Right.
I think overall, I think the general push has been, we'll let everyone think that we know all the answers so they're not panicked. Because part of the worry is if they say we don't know, and then people start going, well, if you don't know, who does? And maybe there's more to life than everything here. Maybe, and not to get political, I don't want to get too political, but maybe people start saying, the system really doesn't work for me, and there's deeper issues there. Again, I've purposely avoided politics on Strange Familiars because I know I'm just going to anger at least 50% of my audience. And I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Well, there's different levels of transparency. Ours is one version of transparency now. Before it was mocked, made fun of, and now there's maybe a light at the end of the tunnel here somewhat with what's going on with the Nimitz and the Tic Tac UFO.
And also, I hope like I'm wrong with all this. It'd be awesome to get some answers. It'd be awesome to get like some form of disclosure. That would be disclosure,
Mhm.
rather. That would be amazing. That would be great. It's just like I say, if at some point someone rolls a Bigfoot body into a lab, I'm willing to, at that point, eat crow and say, I guess I was wrong about all this weird stuff, guys. I guess it's just an animal, but I'm not holding my breath for that.
Yeah, man, I don't know. I feel so content with my working theory and experiences that that will never happen. That
Yeah.
it brings me joy for the fact that the mystery wants to keep itself and has the power to do it. And I think
Hmm.
that the UFO phenomena and the afterlife phenomena has the power to do it because they understand time differently. But I will take issue with the fact that what you said earlier, that nobody really knows what's going on. I think there probably are some really talented magicians out there masquerading as, you know, CEOs or, this elusive 1% that are incredibly close to this phenomena. Now, do they have to do certain biddings in order to alter their consciousness to experience these things and draw close to them? I think so. I think they go through tremendous lengths to find out how all this stuff works. And as you start looking into, again, Tolkien and some of the things that he wrote about in not only Lord of the Rings, but the rest of the trilogy there's so much within just that fairy tale that smacks true of the human condition approaching this stuff here. And it talks about these grand wizards that know these secret things and they share information. I think that it works that way to some level. As unbelievable as that may sound, look how unbelievable the act of it is already, that it exists. So I don't know. I guess I'm more conspiratorial when it comes to that. But as far as naming names, who's ever going to be able to do that? So yeah, I don't know.
Now, I'm going to say something regarding your theory, and I don't mean this in a silly way. You could be right.
I love that. I love that. Yes, well done. Well done. All right.
No,
That's
I mean,
yeah,
but I mean that quite literally. You
yeah.
could be right. I absolutely mean it. I'm not
Right.
being dismissive in any way.
Well, and I mean, I know people that get so deep down the rabbit hole with conspiracies and theories on what really is going on behind the curtain, and they're no longer happy because everything has an angle to it, and it's a dark angle. Because if you feel like you're constantly being slighted by a puppet master, and this is like this whole theory that we're somehow part of this program, this matrix, that we're living in a program, basically, like
Hmm.
Elon Musk says. I think that's a really dark way to look at life.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I heard you say that you don't want to know your future. Well, that's a form of having your future already dictated to you by this puppet master. I don't want to live that way. If it came, well, maybe this is we'll throw this question out here. What if you were given the opportunity and you didn't have a family, there was really nothing that you'd have to leave behind to actually know the deepest secrets of the universe? Would you do it?
Wow.
I mean, it gets into the red pill, the blue pill.
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
really does.
Yeah.
Um,
Could your mind take it?
right. Well, yeah. If I knew it was the last day of my life, you know what I mean? Like if I'm on
Mhm.
my deathbed, I knew it was the last day of my life. Give me the pill. Yeah.
Right,
If I
right.
have more life left to live, no,
Yeah.
because I think you might go insane. You might be right about that.
And we see this within individuals involved at looking into these mysteries, these mystery schools. Some of them literally go insane.
Hmm.
They're found wandering in hotel rooms with toilet paper boxes on their feet, and we have to look at history to appreciate the fact that they had approached this as carefully as possible in some ways, and yet they still got too close to the ring. And so
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know. Yeah.
yeah. It's it happens like you were saying, kind of in the Bigfoot world. It happens in the occult world. There's not a lot of happy stories in the occult world, and I know a lot of my friends are very very involved and very deep into modern Western occultism, and it's just not littered with happy stories. If you look at Aleister Crowley, he died poor and not in a great condition. Austin Spare, who's arguably the most accomplished occultist, he was, by all accounts, absolutely the real deal through and through. He died completely penniless and lived in squalor. It's just, this stuff can go sideways. It can go sideways on you, and that's what I always kind of warn people. Like, yeah, it can go sideways. And I know some people who pretty much declared themselves, master wizards, and they had figured it all out, and they were going to game this system and that system to their benefit using magic, and it all went sideways on them. It can go sideways, and there's usually reasons why. And like you said, it's usually ego involved with it. When I talk about the dark stuff that happened to me in Hex Hollow with the raccoon and all that, I know I broke the rules. Like, the rules are explicit in folklore and what to do. I asked for something, I didn't take it. I hurt somebody's feelings, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I hurt the other's feelings. I specifically asked for something. I was giving something within 10 minutes of asking for it. In this case, I asked for a skull. It was the head of a groundhog that was freshly decapitated, and it was kind of gross. I didn't want to take it, and I broke the rules. I asked for something, I didn't take it.
Right.
I completely ignored it, and I got quite honestly, I got a little freaked out by it, and that is a no-no in folklore. That's a no-no, and I broke the rules. So that's me. I did that. I don't read that as the phenomenon turning on me. I read that as me breaking the rules. Like, that was my mistake. I made a mistake, and I got my butt smacked for it,
I mean, did you ever hear the interview I did with Mark Henyon, the Satanist? I don't know if you
I did not.
That. Okay.
No.
So I had the chance to sit down with a college professor from the University of Oregon named Mark Henyon, and him and his son met me at a pizza parlor. And people have a chance to go back and re-listen to that one. Might help them understand this a little bit. But here you have a highly educated guy who's invested his philosophy into the philosophy of the Church of Satan. And he knows exactly why he's a Satanist. He knows exactly what a real Satanist is and what they're not. What makes Mark different and an outcast to the Church of Satan is the fact that he believes in a creator. And that's not okay when you're a Satanist, which is pretty weird, right? Because you would think that they would believe in the negative, in their opinion, right? Which would be a creator, the light. But that's not the way Satanism works. And if you look at this episode, you'll hear his point of view. There came a point where Mark went out into a cornfield to cast a spell or to do some kind of incantation work. And in their opinion, they were going to do a noble spell. They're going to bring forth something that was to benefit not just them, but to benefit, the world. Instead, they had something completely horrific happen to them and approach them through the cornfield. And it scared Mark so bad that he was tricked, that he had to rethink the fact that maybe he's being hoodwinked in other ways, throughout his philosophy. So you could see the point of transition of where ego was there, then he got his butt smacked, and he's like, okay, I don't think I broke any rules, but yet I opened a doorway here, and I don't know exactly what's passing through this doorway here. So it's a fascinating interview. It's one of the hardest ones I've ever done, because I don't know if you've ever sat down with someone who's just miles above you intellectually, and it's just, their IQ is just flying right out the window compared to you. That scared me. The fact I wouldn't be able to keep up with the guy. And but it's incredibly uncomfortable for the audience to hear about somebody that invests their intellect, their vast intellect, into a counter philosophy that is perceived to be completely dark. But it's worth listening to, because I think it kind of changes your perspective on who people are and how they change and where they come from and how they get there. And you don't have to sell out your intellect to invest in the supernatural, I guess, is the point. It's you were brought up, I believe, Catholic, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I was brought up Protestant. And, within those two religions, there's the discipline of apologetics. You're defending the faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not apologizing to anybody, but you've learned basically to intellectualize the fact that there's a creator and you can defend your faith through this discipline of apologetics. Ravi Zacharias was a guy that I looked up to at the time that was tremendous at defending the faith of Protestantism. And so the point is that if you invest your time towards your worldview and you focus all your time and energy and you absolutely believe what you believe to be really real, and you can do that and live happily, then I think that you've kind of found your own personal answer. That to me wasn't my overall answer, was investing in one particular spiritual point of view. There seems to be all this other cobweb stuff going on, and I've intellectualized. I don't want to say I've evolved because I'm sick of people saying they've constantly evolved, but I feel like I've intellectualized myself, turning a corner and saying, okay, there's more to this. Things are way more complex, and I still don't have to sell out, my intellect to appreciate it. I think some of the world thinks that you and I have bypassed evidence and proof because we've gotten lazy and said, well, just because it's weird, just because it doesn't have an explanation, we have called it a ghost. That's not what we're saying here. We've walked away with a fair amount of physical proof, beyond just the stories here. And I don't know if you can speak to that at all.
Well, I'm very careful about what I say it is. For me specifically, unless I saw a big hairy thing turning that spring onto that paracord in our campsite, I wasn't going to say it's Bigfoot. I say something came in, and I said I heard wood knocks, before we found it, and I recorded wood knocks before we found it. This is like other Bigfoot activity, but I'm not going to say it's Bigfoot. I don't know what it was, but it was there. It was very much there. I have trouble arguing with skeptics anymore, because if you're going to say, I can't tell you it wasn't people. If you want to tell me that was people that did that, I can't prove it wasn't. I don't have film, which is something we should talk about also, about how if I would have set up cameras, I don't think that spring would have been there. But I don't know how to talk to people about this who haven't experienced it in some way. I'm willing to talk to anybody, you know what I mean? But if they're not willing to accept my word, that no, you have to understand those rocks changed in 15 minutes, from the time I left and the time I was there, and there was nobody else in the park. If you're not willing to accept my word on that, I can't talk to you about it, because it's not going to let us get the film proof. I don't think it's whatever this is, it's not going to let us do that. So I can't show it to you on camera. I can't show you those rocks changing on camera. I can't show you that spring being twisted in on camera. I can only tell you it happened. I can play you audio around it for some reason. For some reason, I can play you audio, but I can't show you video. And it's almost as if, I don't want to say you have to have it happen, because a lot of people don't have it happen, and they are open to it, and they do experience it through our stories, whether we're telling them on our podcasts or in our books, and they trust that we are documenting it in the best way that we can, I think. But if someone's just going to be a hard skeptic on it, I don't know how to talk to them sometimes. I don't know how to prove to you that something very, very strange went on, that a storm of coincidences is more than,
right.
than a storm of coincidences,
And why do they get to set the bar about how this is? I mean, why are they the gatekeepers? We're the gatekeepers to the truth. That's the part that's really interesting, is that we're closer and we're more, deep towards the answer here than they are, because we're not denying anything. They've constantly denied this for, forever, as far as I'm concerned. And why is film the bar to be set as the ultimate bit of proof to the? Look at they're doing now with deep fakes. I mean, if you haven't seen what they're doing with face manipulation, I think there's a new movie coming out with Robert De Niro where they put Robert De Niro back at the age of like 35, and you can't tell the difference between Robert De Niro now and age 35. So digital manipulation is there, but the fact is that if you think, and I still toy with this, man. I mean, I still toy with the fact that if I could get some really good audio or FLIR footage of a Bigfoot that might change the game, I still toy with it because it'd be so cool to have that part of the whole photo family album of this mystery. And that's how I honestly try to look at it. But the ego is a funny thing, man. It sneaks in, and this is a giant scavenger hunt, and people are cutting people's throats to get to the end of the race before anybody else. And I still find myself flirting with ego as it pertains to winding up with something cool. Even the most ardent, earthy, woo woo flute playing person out there that obsesses over the fact that these are forest people and obsesses over the fact that they know the answer is heart and love and light, they still deal with it all the time. Because I see these people, these women and men at these conferences, and there's such know-it-alls, man. They just think that they've got it all licked, and that they're going to be the ones that subtly bring it forward in this new age type of way. So it's just as prevalent over here as it is over there.
Mhm.
And it's just the heart. It's the human condition.
Well, one thing that does give me hope is, and I hope he's right. So Josh Cutchin, the guy I'm writing my new book with, he keeps saying again and again that materialism is losing. As a whole, it's going out, and people are going to be much more open to a non-materialist way of looking at the world. So that gives me hope. I hope he's right. I think it's a really hard battle. I mean, a great example is the nuts and bolts UFO versus the something else. I mean that, or even in the Bigfoot world, the big hairy ape in the woods versus something else. It has such a hold in people because of this, this Newtonian way of thinking, you
Mm-hmm.
know, that it's really hard to break. But I mean, Josh is a super smart guy. If he really feels like materialism's on its way out, I hope he's right. I really do.
Yeah, I hope he's right about the materialism ending. I live right outside of Seattle, Washington, and work there occasionally, and it's anything but disappearing in the hearts of big cities. And I worry about that theory. I guess I would probably say Josh Hutchins could be right when it comes to that, but I worry about the exact opposite, that materialism is the new God, that technology is the new God. It's the ultimate materialism. And if you cannot catch up with the singularity, I mean, just look at the panic in the child's face when they don't have the latest tech, be
Hmm.
it gaming systems or whatever. I mean, the real sense of self-worth connected to how much of a cyborg you are.
Right, right.
It's really turned into the fact that how close are you to an engineered object, and you keep these things on your body at all times, and they're constantly monitoring you as much as you're monitoring them. And so if you watch episodes of Black Mirror on the Netflix, I said on the Netflix like an old man. If you watch episodes of Black Mirror on Netflix, you'll get a sense of the kind of dystopian aspect of materialism and tech. But yeah, I think tech is the new ultimate material, and it is the new God.
It's candy for the mind, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And not always, obviously, you can't live on a diet of candy.
Wise words from Timothy Renner. That was quite the dental note that you added towards the end there. No, you can't live on a diet of candy. And if I did, it'd probably be Reese's Pieces, just like E.T. I'd chase him through the forest. That was part one. All right, if you want to hear part two, which I said has added bonus content from the Owl Moon Lab, including this really bizarro video that showed up on Daryl's phone. Now, this is a short little 22-second video that mainly sounds, well, it sounds like background noise, like he accidentally turned on his phone. You'll just hear this audio. And I'm going to put it in part two, but there's something going on, I think, in this audio here that is pretty regular for us down there as far as what it may mean. It's an unknown language on this audio mixed in with possible known language, and it showed up after we left the Al Moon Lab. Maybe it's nothing. You'll have to hear the wind up beforehand. So part 2 with Timothy Renner, and then the added bonus material, including some audio you've never heard before. So that will be in the membership format underneath the second level on Patreon. Just go to Patreon, type in Al Moon Lab, and sign up for the second level one. And if you have any questions, shoot me an email, strangebrowradio@gmail.com. All right, that's it for me, folks. Oh, before I go, don't forget to check out the Point Casino coming up this week, the 11th and 12th in Kingston, Washington. I'll be there with the booth. There's a lot of speakers there. I think there's like 5 or 6. Tom Powell, Ron Moorhead, just to name a few. And me, myself, and I, along with Aaron, Feral by Aaron, and Biggie. Come get your photograph with Biggie, and I'll have some wood watchers there. So that's going to be at the Point Casino this weekend, 11th and 12th. And then Manresa Castle coming up the 25th and 26th. If you'd like to be a part of that, let me know at strangebrowradio@gmail.com, or just call the castle, Manresa Castle in Port Townsend, Washington. If you want to book a room, go to the Castle INPT.com, and you can book a room for the Halloween party, which is on the 26th, or you can book a room for the 25th by just calling the Manresa Castle. It's a haunted hotel, second floor in particular. That's where Ron Moorhead and I'll be, so come have a libation with us, and we'll be having a lot of fun for our first event here. We call Podcastle Live in Manresa Castle in Port Townsend, Washington. All right, I'm out of breath. Thank you again for listening, and hope to see you in part 2. If not, I will see you next week for our regular members. And as always, I'll see you in the trees.